The inheritance. The transport truck rattled down the broken highway, kicking up clouds of red dust that painted the Arizona desert in hues of rust and copper. Marcus Kane sat in the passenger seat, his weathered hands resting on his knees, watching the endless expanse of nothing roll past the window. Beside him, his daughter Emma drove with practiced ease, her dark eyes scanning the road ahead. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Emma asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the last hour. Marcus turned to look at her. At 23, she had her mother's determination written in every line of her face. Not much choice in the matter. "The military gave us the deed. Said it was part of my service compensation package." Emma snorted. "Service compensation? They're giving you a base that's been abandoned for 40 years. That's not compensation. That's a joke." Marcus couldn't argue with that. When the official notice had arrived 3 weeks ago, he'd assumed it was some kind of mistake. The Fort Harrison installation had been decommissioned in 1985, left to rot in the desert when the Cold War ended and budgets got tight. Nobody wanted it. Nobody cared about it. And now somehow it belonged to him. The base appeared on the horizon like a mirage. Concrete buildings bleached white by decades of sun, rusted chain-link fences sagging between crooked posts, guard towers standing empty, their windows dark and hollow. The main gate hung open. One side collapsed entirely onto the cracked pavement. Emma pulled the truck through the gate and stopped in what had once been the main courtyard. A handful of people were already there, standing beside beat-up vehicles and looking at the buildings with expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. "Looks like we have a welcoming committee," Marcus muttered. They climbed out of the truck. The desert heat hit Marcus like a physical force, dry and relentless. A man in an expensive suit walked toward them, his shoes clicking on the broken concrete. Behind him, a woman with a tablet and 3 rough-looking men in work clothes followed. "Mr. Kane," the suited man called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "I'm Richard Moss, representing the Desert Development Corporation. We heard about your inheritance." Marcus shook the offered hand. "News travels fast. Small town, Mr. Kane, small town." Moss gestured at the crumbling buildings around them. "I'll be direct. This place is worthless. Contaminated soil, structural damage, no utilities for 40 years. It would cost millions to make anything of it." "Then why are you here?" Emma asked, her arms crossed. Moss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I'm a generous man. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for the property. Cash. Today. You sign it over, walk away, and forget this place exists." One of the work-clothed men laughed. "50 grand for this dump? That's charity, old man. Take it before he changes his mind." Marcus looked at the buildings, then back at Moss. "No." The smile vanished from Moss's face. "Excuse me?" "I said no. This base was given to me by the United States military. I'm not selling it to some developer who wants to tear it down and build condos." "Condos?" Moss laughed. "In this location? Don't flatter yourself. This land isn't worth anything. The base is falling apart. There's probably asbestos in every building. You're going to spend every penny you have just to make it safe enough to walk through." The woman with the tablet spoke up. "Mr. Kane, I'm with the County Building Commission. We've already scheduled an inspection for next week. I can tell you right now, based on preliminary assessments, this entire facility will be condemned. You'll be legally required to demolish it at your own expense. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars." Emma stepped forward. "Then we'll deal with it." "Thank you for your concern, but we're not interested in selling." One of the workers spat on the ground. "Stupid, both of you. This place is cursed anyway. Everyone knows what happened here." Marcus frowned. "What are you talking about?" The worker grinned, showing missing teeth. "You don't know? Fort Harrison wasn't decommissioned because of budget cuts. They shut it down because people started disappearing. Soldiers, scientists, whole teams. One day they'd be here, next day gone. No bodies, no explanations. Military covered it up, but everybody who lived around here knows the truth." "That's enough, Dale," Moss said sharply. He turned back to Marcus and Emma. "The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, you're on your own." He walked back to his car, the others following. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of engines fading into the distance. Emma let out a long breath. "Well, that was pleasant." Marcus walked toward the nearest building, a long structure that had probably been barracks. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay. Empty rooms stretched down a corridor, their walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti left by decades of trespassers. "Dad, what are we actually going to do with this place?" Emma asked, following him inside. "I don't know yet, but something about this feels wrong. Why would Moss offer $50,000 for worthless land? Why would the county be so eager to condemn it?" They spent the next few hours exploring the surface buildings. Most were exactly what they appeared to be, empty shells of concrete and rust. But as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Emma made a discovery. She'd been exploring what looked like an old administration building when she found it. A door at the end of a corridor, different from the others. While the rest of the building showed decades of neglect, this door was clean. The lock was modern, electronic, out of place in the abandoned structure. "Dad," she called out, "you need to see this." Marcus came running, his boots echoing in the empty hallway. When he saw the door, his expression hardened. "That's military grade. Current generation." "Why would there be a current generation lock on a building that's been abandoned for 40 years? Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the email he'd received with the property transfer. Attached to it was a digital key file, something he'd thought was just for the main gate. He held the phone up to the lock. There was a soft beep and the door clicked open. Beyond it, stairs descended into darkness. Emma pulled out a flashlight. "We're going down there, aren't we?" "You stay here. I'll check it out." "Not a chance, old man. We're in this together." They descended carefully, their flashlights cutting through the blackness. The stairs went down much farther than Marcus had expected, at least 5 stories into the earth. The air grew cooler as they went deeper, and Marcus noticed something that made his pulse quicken. The walls down here were clean, free of dust and decay. The air smelled sterile, filtered. At the bottom of the stairs, they found another door. This one opened automatically as they approached, sliding aside with a soft hiss. Beyond it was a corridor that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. White walls, LED lights flickering to life as they walked. The floor made of some smooth material that seemed to absorb sound. "Dad, what is this place?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know, but it's been maintained. Recently." They walked down the corridor, passing closed doors with electronic panels beside them. At the end of the hallway, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. As they stepped inside, lights blazed to life automatically, revealing a space the size of an aircraft hangar. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the room stood something that made Marcus's blood run cold. A structure of metal and crystal, towering 30 feet high, covered in symbols that weren't any language he recognized. Around it, banks of computers and equipment hummed with power, screens displaying data in languages both human and decidedly not. Emma moved closer, her flashlight forgotten in her hand. "This is impossible. This technology, it's not ours. It can't be ours." Marcus walked to one of the computer terminals. The screen showed a map of the solar system, but with additions he'd never seen before. Stations orbiting Mars, installations on the moon that weren't publicly known, and beyond the orbit of Pluto, something massive, a structure so large it dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. A holographic display suddenly flickered to life above the central structure. A woman's face appeared, middle-aged, wearing a military uniform from the 1980s. Her eyes were kind but carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "If you're seeing this," the hologram said, "then something has gone wrong. Very wrong. My name is Colonel Sarah Chen, and I'm the last commanding officer of Fort Harrison. What you're standing in right now is humanity's first and only alien contact facility." Emma grabbed Marcus's arm. The hologram continued. "In 1983, we made first contact with an alien species. Not the friendly kind. They came to study us, to catalog us, to determine if we were worth harvesting. We fought back, using technology we barely understood, left behind by another species that had tried to warn us. We drove them away, but barely, and we learned something terrifying in the process." The hologram's expression grew darker. "They're coming back. The automated systems here have been monitoring deep space, watching for their return. If this facility has transferred ownership, if the protocols have been activated, then the detection systems have picked up something. They've been spotted again, and this time we might not be ready." The hologram flickered. "Everything you need to know is in the archives. Every piece of technology, every weapon system, every defense protocol. This base isn't abandoned, Mr. Kane. It's been waiting for them, and waiting for someone brave enough to use it. The hologram faded, leaving Marcus and Emma standing in silence, surrounded by technology that shouldn't exist, in a facility that couldn't be real, facing a truth that would shatter everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the universe. Above them, in the dying light of the desert sunset, the first stars began to appear, and among them, something moved, something that had traveled across the vast emptiness of space with a singular purpose. Fort Harrison wasn't a joke. It wasn't worthless land. It was humanity's last line of defense, and Marcus Kane had just inherited the responsibility of saving the world. Emma turned to him, her face pale in the artificial light. "Dad, what do we do?" Marcus looked at the screens, at the warnings flashing across dozens of displays, at the countdown that had begun the moment they'd entered the facility, 72 hours until the objects in deep space reached Earth's orbit. "We wake this place up," he said, "and we call everyone we know who won't think we're crazy. That's a pretty short list. Then we're going to need to convince some people real fast." He pulled out his phone, but there was no signal this deep underground. "Come on. We need to get back to the surface and make some calls." "And Emma?" "Yeah, Dad? Those people who laughed at us today? The ones who said this place was worthless? Don't say anything to them, not yet. If there's really something coming, the last thing we need is panic. Or worse, someone trying to take this facility from us before we understand what we have." They hurried back up the stairs, their minds racing with possibilities and fears. Behind them, in the depths of Fort Harrison, ancient systems continued their work, monitoring, calculating, preparing for a war that humanity had forgotten, but that had never forgotten humanity. The base had been sleeping for 40 years, but now it was awake, and the real test was about to begin. The truth revealed, the sun rose over Fort Harrison like a warning, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Marcus hadn't slept. Neither had Emma. They'd spent the entire night in the underground facility, scrolling through files, watching recorded briefings, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they'd discovered. The coffee in Marcus's hand had gone cold hours ago, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on a holographic display showing the solar system. 3 red dots blinked at the edge of the projection, moving steadily toward Earth. The computer estimated their arrival in 68 hours. "Dad, you need to see this," Emma called from across the chamber. She was standing in front of a massive wall screen, her fingers dancing across a touch interface. "I found the original contact reports from 1983. Marcus joined her, and together they watched grainy footage that should have been impossible. A ship, massive and angular, hovering over the Pacific Ocean, fighter jets scrambling, their missiles exploding harmlessly against an invisible barrier. Then the ship descending, landing in a remote area of New Mexico, just 200 miles from where they stood now. Colonel Chen's voice narrated the footage. First contact occurred on March 15, 1983, at 0300 hours. The entity identified itself as a survey vessel from the Krell Confederacy. Their mission was resource assessment. They considered Earth a viable candidate for processing." Emma paused the playback. "Processing. They wanted to strip mine the entire planet." "Keep watching," Marcus said quietly. The footage continued. Negotiations, if they could be called that. The Krell were coldly efficient, offering humanity a choice: voluntary relocation to designated zones while they harvested Earth's resources, or forcible removal. They gave Earth's government 72 hours to decide. But something unexpected happened on hour 68. Another ship arrived. Smaller, elegant, moving with a grace that made the Krell vessel look clumsy by comparison. This ship landed at Fort Harrison, which at the time was a secret research facility. From it emerged beings that looked almost human, tall and slender with silver skin and eyes that held the depth of ancient wisdom. "The Valdari," Colonel Chen's voice explained. "They called themselves the Watchers. They'd been monitoring Earth for centuries, waiting to see if humanity would develop enough to join the galactic community. The Krell arrival forced their hand. The Valdari brought a gift and a warning. The gift was technology, weapons and defenses that could repel the Krell. The warning was simple: the Krell would return. They always did. And next time, humanity would face them alone." Marcus watched as the footage showed human and Valdari engineers working together, converting Fort Harrison into a fortress of alien technology, weapons that bent space itself, shields that could withstand nuclear strikes, detection systems that could spot a ship from beyond Pluto's orbit, and then the battle. The Krell didn't take humanity's resistance well. They sent 3 more ships, thinking sheer force would break the upstart species. But Fort Harrison was ready. The footage showed beams of pure energy lancing into the sky, tearing through Krell vessels like paper. Explosions that lit up the night sky across 3 states. A battle that lasted 6 hours and left the Krell fleet in ruins. The world never knew. The government covered it up, classified it beyond top secret, and buried the truth so deep that even most military personnel didn't know what had really happened at Fort Harrison. Colonel Chen appeared on screen one last time, older now, tired. We won that battle, but we didn't win the war. The Valdari warned us the Krell would send a report back to their homeworld before they were destroyed. It would take decades for that message to reach them, and decades more for a response. But it would come. The Krell don't forgive. They don't forget. And they certainly don't accept defeat from a species they consider primitive. The recording ended. Marcus and Emma stood in silence, the weight of history pressing down on them. So we have 68 hours before they arrive. Emma said, "What do we do?"
Call the military?
The government. Marcus shook his head. Look at the final report. After the battle, the government decided the threat was over. They decommissioned Fort Harrison, scattered the personnel, destroyed most of the records. They convinced themselves it was a one-time event. If we call them now, they'll think we're crazy. Or worse, they'll try to take this facility and study it while the real threat gets ignored. Then what? Marcus walked to the central control station. Screens surrounded him, showing system after system coming online. The base's AI had been working all night, running diagnostics, preparing weapons that hadn't been fired in 4 decades. We do what Colonel Chen intended. We activate the defenses. We prepare for war. Dad, we're 2 people. 2 people against an alien invasion fleet. No, Marcus said, pulling up a schematic of the base. We're 2 people with the most advanced defensive platform on Earth, and we're not completely alone. He showed her a directory of names, people who had worked at Fort Harrison during its active years. Most were old now, retired or dead, but some were still alive. Scientists, engineers, soldiers who knew the truth and had kept silent for 40 years. We start making calls, Marcus said. We bring back the people who know what this place can do. Over the next 12 hours, they made contact with 7 former Fort Harrison personnel. 3 hung up immediately, unwilling to revisit the past. 2 had died, their families confirming it. But 2 answered, listened, and believed. Dr. James Rodriguez had been a young physicist in 1983, one of the engineers who had worked directly with the Valdari. Now he was 73, retired, and living in Texas. When Marcus explained what was happening, there was a long pause on the line. I knew this day would come, Rodriguez said finally. I've been waiting 40 years. I'll be there by tonight. The second was Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, now Major Morrison, retired. She'd been a pilot, one of the few who had flown combat missions against the Krell. Give me the coordinates, she said. And Marcus, prepare for company. If the detection systems are active, others are going to notice. She was right. That afternoon, 3 black SUVs appeared at the base's entrance. Men in suits emerged, flashing credentials that identified them as Department of Defense. The lead agent, a stern-faced man named Pearson, demanded entry. Marcus met them at the gate, Emma beside him. This is private property. You need a warrant. Mr. Kane, we've detected unusual energy signatures emanating from this location. As a matter of national security, we need to investigate. You've been monitoring this place? We monitor all former military installations, especially ones with classified histories. Pearson's eyes narrowed. We know what Fort Harrison was. We know what's buried here, and we know you've activated systems that were meant to stay dormant. Then you also know why I activated them, Marcus said. Check your deep space monitoring systems. You'll see the same things I'm seeing. Pearson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. We've seen the anomalies. Our analysts believe they're asteroids or comets. Your analysts are wrong, perhaps, but that's not your concern. Stand aside, Mr. Kane. No. The agents reached for their weapons, but before anyone could draw, the ground began to shake. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Behind Marcus, the base came alive. Lights blazed from buildings that had been dark for decades. The rusted fence posts straightened and the broken gates repaired themselves. Nanomachines that had been dormant for 40 years suddenly activated, and from the center of the base, something rose. A tower of crystalline metal, climbing into the sky, its surface covered in flowing patterns of light. At its peak, energy gathered, visible even in daylight, a sphere of power that made the air taste like lightning. Pearson and his men stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. "What the hell is that?" "That," Marcus said calmly, "is a Valdari defense cannon. Its range is approximately 1 million kilometers. Its power output could vaporize everything within a 100-mile radius if fired at ground level. And right now it's targeting those 3 ships heading toward Earth." Pearson stared at the tower, his face pale. "You can't be serious. You're going to fire an alien weapon into space without authorization, without any oversight?" "I have all the authorization I need. This base was transferred to me legally. The protocols are clear. When the Krell return, Fort Harrison activates. With or without government approval, you'll start an interstellar war." "The war started 40 years ago," Marcus said. "We just stopped paying attention." A car skidded to a stop behind the SUVs. Dr. Rodriguez climbed out, moving faster than a man his age should. He took one look at the tower and grinned. "Beautiful. She still works." "Marcus, we need to check the capacitor systems. That much power if the containment fields aren't stable." "I know. Emma's running diagnostics now." Major Morrison arrived an hour later, this time in a helicopter. She jumped out before it fully landed, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes sharp despite her 70 years. "Status?" "Tower's at 60% charge," Marcus reported. "We have contact confirmation. 3 Krell heavy cruisers matching the profiles from 1983. They'll be in firing range in 52 hours. Morrison looked at Pearson and his agents. "You boys going to be a problem, or are you going to help?" Pearson looked from the tower to the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere up there, 3 ships filled with beings that saw humanity as nothing more than an obstacle were approaching. He holstered his weapon. "What do you need?" "Call your superiors," Marcus said. "Tell them Fort Harrison is active. Tell them the Krell are coming. And tell them we're going to need every defensive asset we can get. Because if this base falls, Earth has no second line of defense." That night, the desert filled with vehicles. Military convoys, scientists, engineers pulled out of retirement, all converging on Fort Harrison. The base that had been mocked, the inheritance that had been called worthless, became humanity's most important facility overnight. Richard Moss appeared again, his expensive suit now dusty and rumpled. He'd seen the tower, seen the military presence, and his face had gone from smug superiority to shocked understanding. "Kane, I need to talk to you." "That offer I made? Get off my property," Marcus said without looking at him. "And take your friends with you. We have work to do." In the command center, deep below ground, screens showed the approaching threat. 3 ships, each one larger than an aircraft carrier, moving with deadly purpose. Emma stood beside her father, watching the countdown. 50 hours until they entered Earth's orbit. 50 hours until the battle that would determine humanity's future. "Do you think we can stop them?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked around the chamber at the technology that shouldn't exist, at the people who had come together because they remembered what it meant to stand between Earth and oblivion. He thought about Colonel Chen, about the Valdari who had believed humanity was worth saving, about his daughter who had trusted him enough to follow him into this impossible situation. "We stopped them once," he said. "We'll stop them again." The tower hummed with building power, its light visible for hundreds of miles, a beacon that told the universe something important. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not helpless, and anyone who came to Earth looking for an easy target was about to learn a very hard lesson. Fort Harrison had awakened, and this time it wasn't going back to sleep. Above them, 3 ships adjusted their course, their sensors detecting the energy signature that had destroyed their predecessors 40 years ago. Inside those ships, the Krell prepared for battle, confident in their superiority, certain of their victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The real war was about to begin.